What's a rich people thing that rich people don't know is a rich people thing? Before we start with the first story, please hit subscribe and ring the notification bell to stay updated with us. Story 1. There was an article in Norway some years back asking rich people how they saved money. I think this was after the 2008 financial crisis. One billionaire, Stein Erik Hagen, answered that he was frugal by sending his old shirts back to his Savile Row tailor to have his shirt collars replaced. He suggested more people should save money like that. It has become an example in Norway of how absolutely clueless and detached some rich people are. Story 2. The people in those Rocket Money ads that don't realize they have multiple subscriptions coming out of their account that they don't know about. How? That's literally part of the business model and investor pitch for subscription services. A portion of the people that sign up will forget to cancel your service or be too lazy to do so, generating consistent cash flow with no additional acquisition costs. If your product is digital live streaming, that's essentially pure profit. You may not be one of those people, good on you, but the model's success is pretty clear evidence that not everyone is so diligent. Story 3. I find most of the rich people I meet are aware of the money advantages they have, but they often still underestimate the compounding effects that access to all kinds of experiences and opportunities has had on them. Not that they don't appreciate them, but they're not fully aware of the scope of the advantages. Story 4. I grew up mostly working class, but by the time I graduated high school, my dad started making really good money. He definitely started to get a little out of touch and used to get on me and my siblings about how we managed our money. One day he was telling me about the bonus he had gotten from his job. To this day, he still remembers how I told him that he was just handed in a single day more money than I made in an entire year. He credits this as one of the moments that helped adjust his perception of our own finances. He no longer bothers us about money anymore. Story 5. When I told my boss my wife was pregnant, she told me how we should go on a trip before the baby comes. She started talking about how much she enjoyed her recent trip to Hawaii. I'm just sitting there like, she's back in school, she's cutting hours at work, we have to care for a baby soon. Like I'm not made of money, we can't all just go to Hawaii on a whim. Story 6. My company introduced unlimited PTO, aka a tool to deny workers vacations, a few years back with some blurb about a higher-up who thought it was a wonderful idea because a year ago he had a chance to go on a $99,000, my estimate, 5-week safari in Tanzania, but the poor sap only had 3 weeks vacation available and had to make compromises to go. Yeah. I'm sure that happens to factory workers, secretaries, and junior engineer all the time, and we can all totally relate. Story 7. My husband's cousin got married in Hawaii several years ago. The wedding was for mid-October, and they told us around Labor Day. Yeah, let me just pull into my account and find those extra few thousand just doing nothing. I was also talking to a coworker once, and I asked what he was going to do over our holiday break. We get about 2 to 3 weeks. He was going to Paris. I just said, "Oh, that sounds nice. I've never been." He immediately said, "You must go." Yeah, making $20 an hour with 2 kids who need glasses, braces, and God knows what else. Let me get right on that. Story 8. People who hire others for household tasks like laundry, housekeeping, grocery shopping, cooking, and yard work often assume everyone does the same. This might explain why they think you should work longer hours and have little time off. For us everyday folks, just managing housework can feel like having another job. Story 9. Unpaid internships. So many people have no idea what a luxury it is to be able to gain valuable experience and contacts in your chosen field while in college. I could never afford to take an unpaid internship because I had to earn money to pay for my tuition, rent, and food. So while some of my classmates were working unpaid at law firms, I was delivering pizzas and working on a moving truck. Story 10. Mortgages. Most people think the ultra-rich buys all their homes with cash in hand. That's not always true. Even Mark Zuckerberg took out a mortgage as a billionaire. The extremely low interest rates offered means he could invest his wealth immediately in other things. Story 11. When rich people hear about poor people getting check cashing loans with high interest rates, they assume it's because poor people are dumb or irresponsible, not that they have an urgent need for cash now and are forced to take a hit due to urgency. Story 12. Buying a $300 gadget where a $20 gadget works just fine. Amazon Smeg 50 style retro toaster $299.99 / Amazon Basics $19.99. I had a coworker, same rough salary, whose family was wealthy. For her new apartment, she bought a $1,000 coffee table which looked very similar to my respectable solid oak one I paid $150 for. Buying a high-quality tool to fix a one-time / infrequent project versus renting same tool for 1/3 the cost. Things like expensive tile saws, industrial pressure washers. Story 13. I have a niece who is clueless about finances and has always had money available to her. Growing up, she would always invite her friends and cousins to very expensive restaurants on her birthday or other occasions and expect everyone to chip in at the end for the bill. She got pissed at my son when he started declining her invitation, even when he explained he couldn't afford it. Story 14. As they get older, especially if they have worked but then stopped for whatever reason, they gradually lose touch with what normal pay is. I'm in my 30s, but a close friend of mine has family wealth and only worked for a couple years post-uni for her parents' company, and as progressive as she works hard to be, it's a nightmare trying to get her to understand what a livable wage is now. Her mother is the worst though. She wants the sun and moon from people she won't pay more than $15 per hour, minimum wage, where we live. Story 15. I mean, technically if you live in a first world country, then you're rich by default. Our poorest people are still richer than most of the world's population. So basically most things we do on a daily basis, just having to pay an electricity bill means you're rich. And if you can't pay the bill, it's likely because it's going to some other sort of privilege others don't have, like food in your fridge or a roof over your head. Sounds absurd, but it's true. What are some things that rich / ultra-rich people do which the average person doesn't even consider? Story 1. Years ago, I read an article about someone whose business was keeping ultra-rich people's cars ready to go, as in if you have a Ferrari in multiple cities, they'd keep it fueled up, oil changed, etc., and drive it around the block once a week or so, and have it waiting at the airport when the owner flies into town. Story 2. Buying a home for their college-age children. Then they sell the house when their kid graduates. Sometimes this sale pays for college. My housemate at university had a younger sister living near us in a condo their dad bought for her. She was 18 and her boyfriend was 40. When it was time to graduate, the dad called and asked me, I was working at a real estate company as the receptionist, if I could tell them to just sell the condo and they could keep the profit. Neither could be bothered. So I said I'd do it. He told me his goal here was to have his kids do anything, just something to make a living. Mind you, my housemate borrowed $40,000 from him to start a business which became very successful, and he paid his dad back in full, with interest, in 6 months. Story 3. There are several single-family owned Montessori schools. Like a family office put together an entire mini-school just for their kids and their friends' kids. It became a thing to do when the pandemic hit. Some of them are 100% mobile too, like teaching on the jet / all over the world. Story 4. Having separate sets of clothing in each house so they don't have to take more than carry-on luggage when traveling. And keep their pools heated 24/7, 365 for homes in multiple countries. It takes longer than the time for a flight from one country to the next to heat the pool. So yeah, needs to always be on and heated. Oh, also we are talking about homes they in total visit less than 50 days a year and leave for over 6 months of the year. But just in case. Story 5. I live near Scottsdale with a lot of wealthy people. They constantly remodel their vacation homes, so there's always great stuff. I bought a brand new Viking refrigerator from Craigslist. Still wrapped. It's 8 feet tall, 36 inch. The homeowners decided they wanted a double refrigerator instead. They've owned the home 2 years. Still haven't stayed a night there. The refrigerator retails for $18,000. I got it for $1,500. Story 6. I have several rich friends who are my age, 50s, and don't work. Their biggest perk is attending every concert and show and buying front row seats. Not just our area, but if their favorite band is playing across the country, they fly, with their kids, there and spend the weekend. I've known people whose adult children follow their favorite band around the world, attending every concert. Even if I had the money, there is no one I like that much. Story 7. I dated a girl from a super rich family for a couple years, and every spring her entire family would go through their closets and donate 90% of their wardrobe and then go out and drop $20,000 plus on entirely new clothes for the year because they had to have the new season of everything. As someone who grew up wearing clothes till they fell apart and patching them if they still fit, this blew my mind. Getting rid of perfectly good clothes because they were last season is just insane to me. Story 8. They call boutique stores ahead of time to say they are coming in on date X. The boutique high-end store pulls every super expensive items complete with accessories on a rolling rack to have ready. I worked in a high-end store back in the day. If it was on sale, they pulled the sale tag off and literally tried to get rid of all the expensive items, think layering to upsell. Story 9. Have assistants do things we wouldn't dream of doing. I know a rich person who hired a personal assistant to find a land to purchase. Here are the criteria: forested land by the sea, cliffs, quiet area but with cell reception, and make it so that it isn't an area with lots of boat traffic so I can take my bath while looking out at sea. Story 10. Man imported an ancient monastery door to use on his ranch home. I worked on a ranch just south of Crested Butte, CO. If you aren't a billionaire, don't even think about looking at buying a home there. The owner of the ranch bought the front door from a Tibetan monastery and flew it to the US to use as his front door on his main house. It was all ornamental hand-carved, like 3,000 years old, approximate 12 feet by 6 feet by 2 feet, and weighed tons upon tons upon tons. Not even the cost of the door itself, but the shipping alone must have been astronomical. And this was just his front door on his main house. There must have been over 10 buildings on the property. I've seen / worked on many billionaire mansions all over CO, and this dude's ranch is the nicest I've ever seen. Story 11. I live outside of a major city. I am from a not wealthy area bordering on a wealthy area, but my parents sent me to private school, so I have friends from both places. I offhandedly mentioned to a wealthier friend the other day that I saw a condo on sale for $2 million in one of the richer towns. I said that if I were in the market for a $2 million property here, I'd be looking for a house, not an apartment. She explained that they weren't for sale with full-time living in mind. They are mostly used as pied terrace by mega-rich people who bounce back and forth between the city and further out in the suburbs, and don't want to have to rush home / beat traffic / deal with trains, or for people who dock their yachts nearby. Story 12. Steve Jobs decided he didn't like having a license plate because he could be identified by it and it kept getting stolen. So he called up the Mercedes dealer and made a deal with them. NCAA, it was legal to drive a car with no license plate for 30 days after you get it. So, once a month, they'd show up and replace his car with an identical new Mercedes, so he'd never have a car for more than 30 days and could effectively drive around forever with no license plate. Story 13. Buying a multi-million-dollar home nearby where they're building a bigger multi-million-dollar home so they can be nearby during construction. Dozens of spare current tech devices in case they lose one, don't want to pack one or it dies. Buying a quarry so they can guarantee all of the stone in their home is the same. Story 14. My friend paid the fee to be able to have a personal escort for his family at Disney World that walks your group to the front of all the lines. I think that it was like $7,500 a day. I just got back from Disneyland in California. If I was wealthy enough and my kids wanted to go badly enough, I would pay for that service. Disney was a nightmare of crowds and lines. Even if they skip the line passes, Genie Plus doesn't really skip lines, maybe half the line and not for every ride. The crowds were so intense the kids wanted to leave by dinner time and they could not stand being there any longer. Here we thought we were acting fancy paying for preferred parking to save ourselves extra walking upon leaving LOL. Story 15. Not ultra rich, but I shared an apartment with some people in college. One of the roommates we had never came out of his room, and his parents paid for an Indian granny to come every week and cook him a week's worth of fresh food. And let me tell you, every time she came over, all the rest of us were drooling and also kinda pissed because she took over the small kitchen for a few hours. He still ordered food delivery every single day, sometimes twice or 3 times a day, and always had the best electronics. He never came out of his room, never talked to us, and didn't seem to go to class frequently. I definitely thought that kid's family must be rich and trying to teach him how to slum it in a shared space. What's a simple sign that someone is rich? Story 1. I remember a fling I had with an insanely rich girl. Her parents probably worth 300+ million. Instead of going on a date, we switched to hanging out in their Olympic-sized pool at their ranch with her and her bodyguard. Got drunk in the main 8,000 square feet house. Next day I had to leave to go to a 9 a.m. meeting. She was trying to decide if she wanted to stay in town, take the jet to Nashville, or head to Hawaii to meet up with family. Story 2. I've seen this asked on here before, and the top comment was that you can tell when they care more about how long something is going to take than they do about how much it will cost. Which is a weird metric because I care a lot more about how long my 40K minis will take to paint than how much they'll cost, and I'm absolutely not rich, possibly because of the minis. Story 3. As a bank teller, when I open up their account and see that they got a ton of money. Most of the rich people I've met, you wouldn't know they are passing them on the street. I know some rich people who wear worn out clothes and drive a box. Guess you would have more money if you don't spend it on anything. Story 4. They're always going sailing or skiing. This is how I found out just how poor I was, LOL. I was in college and talking to classmates about the upcoming winter break. I was all excited for my Black Friday movie and game binge, and these MFs were talking about skiing at Vail. We're in Ohio. It wasn't like a day trip. Story 5. One of the most reliable ways to figure out someone's income bracket is to talk about vacations. Even the most old money stealth wealth people splurge on vacations. And not just where they vacation, but how often they vacation. Most people can save up for a big trip now and then, but the wealthy vacation often and regularly because they can afford to take so much time off. 3 weeks skiing every winter, then a summer in New England, 2 weeks at the family cabin for Thanksgiving every year, the annual fishing trip to the Caribbean with the old college buddies, etc. Story 6. All this stuff about new money and old money is hilarious. I used to work at a bar where the owner of the restaurant company that ran it would frequent. Sure, he dressed normal and drove an unassuming Buick minivan. But he absolutely loved talking about his collection of paintings and his property on a Great Lake. Truth is, there's no real way to tell if someone is rich unless you look at their finances. Story 7. You really can't tell, since a lot of people with money don't act like they have money. For example, I used to audit banks and had to audit in the small town I grew up in. I was shocked. The people I thought had money growing up, didn't. They were in debt up to their eyeballs, and the people who had money, nobody knew they had money. That included my grandparents. It just made me sad. My parents had money. They took multiple trips to Europe. They didn't need my grandparents' money. My grandparents should have enjoyed life more. Instead, they sacrificed to give their children a nice inheritance that they didn't need. My kids will inherit money from me, but not to the point that I am sacrificing like my grandparents did. My dad went and bought a new 85K truck with some of the inheritance. I'm sure my grandparents are rolling over in their graves. Story 8. They casually mention rental properties, vacationing all the time, buying new vehicles every so often. I see people RVing on YouTube and talking about how everyone should do it with whatever money you got, 'cause it's great. These YouTubers, before being famous on YouTube, were making and still are making over 100K a year. So obviously they can camp and RV all year long, but they make it sound easy and cheap. I kinda rented a lil, sorry, first couple sentences still stand for simple sign IMO. Story 9. There are 2 types of rich: the newly rich and the truly rich. The newly rich spend money on things that will show up their neighbors like it is a show of pride. They have no problem buying boats, building huge McMassians, whatever to show off their wealth. And oftentimes, they end up broke. How many lottery winners end up broke? The truly rich, however, don't do any of that. They live their lives and don't show it off as they don't see a need to. They don't feel the need to show others how rich they are. And they stay rich. Story 10. Confidence. I think you really just load differently when you are financially secure. Went to what is considered a posh school in the Philippines. I'd say I belong to low-tier middle class. My parents were able to afford high-quality education, but we had to be careful with other expenses. Anyway, I observed that most of the generationally rich ones I went to school with, not all, but a significant number of them, did not make a fuss about how they looked. They went to school wearing plain clothes, basic shoes, bags, etc., and most of them had an air of confidence that was not intimidating, but you can tell they never had nor will they ever have to worry about survival. They really just load differently. Story 11. Nouveau riche, they're insecure crap and competitively parade income at every turn. They like to be in the way because it's owed to them, and the stuff they own is because of other people's opinions. Frequently very unhappy/insecure people. Old money, they're secure, unremarkable, and polite, but don't waste time worrying about fads, intrusive privilege, nor suffering fools, and the things they own are just the way they like them. Occasionally a bit adrift if they haven't touched the ground in a few generations. Story 12. I know someone in the 3 Comma Club, first-generation American and all self-made. The dude knows the value of money, but I've heard him say some truly wacky sentences. If you're ever in Miami, let me know and you can stay on my East Coast yacht. In regards to the most expensive mansion in Pasadena, I bought the place next to it so I could wake up every day and see it, kinda like how Brooklyn is the best view of Manhattan. We're going to Hong Kong for the weekend. If you want to join, we can just pick you up on the way. Story 13. We live in a house of mirrors. The premier brands are now serving down-market trinkets to the masses because of their high volume and margins. Hermes blankets? LV everything. Wealthy people don't want to be targeted for robbery or kidnapping. They don't want black Suburbans with a driver and guard. Most will browse and then send an assistant to make the purchase. Old money is uncomfortable with salespeople groveling and fawning over them. Story 14. If they are short or scrawny looking and they walk around like they don't give a crap and have all the confidence in the world when talking to whoever, that's someone who's, outside of their own father, has never been challenged, never been messed with, never been made to feel anxious or vulnerable. Only a rich kid can pull that crap off without needing to put on some muscles or paying someone with muscles to protect them. They'll talk to adults as if they're equal, but with respect, of course, and you'll see them going out alone as teenagers to get coffee or to do whatever. When most kids need to have their friends together and roll as a crew because just in case if something bad happens. Rich kids never have to worry about anything bad happening because they're never in bad neighborhoods. Story 15. Understated, well-tailored clothing in muted colors. Cashmere. Well-traveled and can hold conversations on a variety of topics from personal experience, but need to splash it all over social media or prove anything to a common peon. Don't swear. Prioritize education, and if they have children, will make sure they get into the best school starting kindergarten to continue the legacy of privilege, often by rubbing shoulders with the right crowd because their habits will rub off on you. Major bonus points if you know French and appreciate French culture. Have skiing as your main hobby. Spent time at boarding schools in your formative years. What screams, "I'm just pretending to be rich"? Story 1. Overhead, the Walmart cashier is talking about a coworker who wears $10,000 designer sneakers. One coworker said he must be rich. The other said, then why does he work at Walmart with us? Story 2. When I first moved to LA, my neighbors were 4 Persian guys in their early 20s living in a 2-bedroom place. They each had new flashy cars, designer clothes, gold chains, and hit the clubs. They used to come to my place to drink and watch some football because they had very little furniture in their place with no TV. They couldn't afford cable. Story 3. I used to be friends with a guy who was always so obsessed with how he looked and how he was portrayed in public. He always said he wanted to look good. I have nothing against wanting to look good, but he went into debt buying the most ridiculous items. $800 shoes he bought specifically for a job he quit months later, luxury ring that was $4,000, then a luxury bracelet that was $11,000. He worried about stuff like that. Meanwhile, he lived rent-free in a really run-down apartment with rotting floors, constantly ceiling leaks, etc. Story 4. Flaunting generic rich people things that literally anyone with an extra few $100s can buy at any time, like higher-end cigars or cognac or luxury fashion brands. I find cigars generally to be this. It's like a signaling power move. Yeah, this is inconveniencing everyone around us. So what are you going to do about it? I'm a big guy with a big smoke cock in my mouth. I'm a boss. I can make a big cloud, and if you don't like it, I don't care. The whole thing is just so stupid. Story 5. Trying too hard. Most wealthy people are careful with their money. Most wealthy people don't need others to know how wealthy they are. The wealthiest folks I know all shop at Costco. No joke, it's a surprising trend. Granted, they're surely able to store all their Costco stuff in a massive walk-in pantry, but still. An expression I like that encapsulates this is, money talks, but wealth whispers, and power is silent. Story 6. My brother had a coworker who did this: bought a Mercedes convertible beautiful car. Drove it into work to very confused employees because everybody knew just about how much everyone else made at the company and knew she couldn't afford it. All of a sudden she stopped bringing it to work and he found out that it was actually a 1-year lease, and to get the payment down, she agreed to very low allowable miles. Took it up the California coast and used basically her entire year mileage limits in a weekend. It sat parked at her house for the rest of the year until she took it back. Story 7. I went to school with a guy who at 16 got a professional football, soccer contract. To be fair, he was majestic in his talent. I saw him in a nightclub 2 years later. We were both 18, and I congratulated him on his success. He then proceeded to mock the fact that I was wearing a mid-range watch and shown me his Rolex. But the success went to his head before he could play for the big leagues. He ended up partying too hard and fighting with everyone. He went to prison for 5 years for punching someone and causing severe damage. Lost everything. I seen him a few years back. In our 30s now. He still has an aura of I am better than everyone. But he biffed it due to his hubris. I'm far from being a rich man, but he's still acting like he has something over me, but in reality, he's just an embarrassing failure. A waste of talent and a waste of breath. Story 8. I work with higher net worth clients, and at first it shocked me at how the vast majority you'd basically never know they were wealthy. One of our biggest clients lived in a relatively modest house and drove an older car. I think they recognized money can buy freedom, but they had zero interest in being flashy or bringing any kind of attention. Story 9. Carrying a large wad of cash around, so when they pay for something they have to pull it out and flip through it. There will be a few large bills on the outside, followed by mostly small bills. Like, yeah, you got $500 in your hands. I have it on my debit card like a normal adult. It's not impressive, it's corny. Also a good way to make yourself a target. Story 10. Not knowing what luxury brands are actually good at making. Gucci's loafers are in the MoMA permanent collection. They've been making them for about 70 years. They go with anything. Any cobbler can resole them about a dozen times before they're truly dead. They've been making luggage for even longer. Gucci's watches, backpacks, sunglasses, and TBH. A lot of the clothing is usually not made by Gucci themselves, and virtually never made nearly as well. It's for people who see a Gucci logo and think this must be good. Imagine if your friend was bragging about a fancy new timepiece he got from Skechers. That's what an actual rich guy sees when you have a Gucci watch on. Same goes for, I don't know, anything from Armani or Tom Ford that isn't a suit, anything from Burberry that isn't a trench coat, anything from Ferrari that isn't a car. Story 11. Trying it all. I grew up blue-collar AF and managed to have done nicely for myself. My youngest got to attend a very prestigious East Coast prep school for high school. Mind you, she was a financial aid kid. But the takeaway was the folks who were a tad more quiet and reserved, dressed nicely, but no flashy jewelry or labels, and drove the beat-up Mercedes wagon. Those were the rich folks. Story 12. The truly, earned it and keeping it rich people tend to have odd passions that they'll talk your ear off about. One guy I know collected old Star Wars figurines. Another was a passionate fish keeper. And another funded his wife's career as a fencing instructor because it made her happy and he liked watching fencing. He could tell you about tours she'd been on with students, medals her students had won, upcoming or regular events, the whole 9 yards. And another loved farming and animal husbandry because he'd grown up in the countryside before making his money in the oil industry. If you go to their houses, these things are on show, and clearly, it's their style. Fake rich people are only passionate about the trappings of richness. Cars, watches, handbags, designer clothes, etc., and it frequently shows. Their houses have no soul, no odd quirky collections or interesting things on the walls to talk about. Story 13. Living in a rich town and making friends with all the rich people who just use you, but refusing to actually put in any work to better your situation, even when you're clearly suffering and living in denial, pain, and poverty. But for whatever reason, your image and what everybody else does and thinks is all that matters. Imagine actually thinking any of those people give a crap. Where are they when you need help? Nowhere. Yet you choose to pretend you're one of them, maybe holding out for hope that somebody will add you to their will or something. And who's gonna be there to pick up the pieces? It's all so fake, it's gotta be exhausting. Okay, rant over. Story 14. Expensive brands. Everyone and their mother have iPhones, expensive clothes, BMWs, and fly sneakers. They just get themselves on crap loans and massive CC debt that will cause them huge problems later down the line, but it's not hard to get those things if you really want to, so they're not the flex they think they are. They're just digging themselves into a hole. Also copying those pitiful hustle/grind TikToks and trying to dress business casual at all times and constantly trying to show off their watch. Actually, rich people have stuff that is super expensive but doesn't look like it, or they look like hobos. I know a guy who is a literal multimillionaire and owns his own company with 600 people on payroll, and if you looked at him, he looks like a working class guy in his 60s with cheap clothes, a modest car, and nothing fancy about him. He does have some expensive stuff, but he really did come from nothing, so other than splurging a few times in his life nowadays, he just lets the company run on autopilot and stays in his farm growing cabbages and feeding his animals. Story 15. I see a lot of people calling high-end fashion, but it's not quite 1 and 0. If you're fake rich, you crap on people for not wearing name brands. If you're real rich, you don't crap on others' choice of clothing, unless you're super rich and talking to other super rich people about why they're wearing an $8,000 suit as opposed to an $80,000 suit. What is the most rich thing you've seen wealthy people say/do casually? Story 1. My dad knows a billionaire who had a French chateau disassembled and reassembled in the US. He acted like it was just as normal as building a house. My dad's been there a few times and said it's an insane property with a huge man-made lake and huge sprawling lawns. I went to a guy's house one time that has been a church in the UK. Apparently it was going to be torn down, so he had it shipped to the US and then built a modern house around it. Stunning home. Story 2. So I work part-time at a strip club and we have some very rich clientele. Some of them come in all the time and we get to know a lot about them. They get to know a lot about us. Well, one of our security guys died of a sudden massive heart attack. One of the rich clientele just called the funeral home and paid for everything, like there was no second thought. We were all taking up a collection to help a bit and he just dropped the whole bill just like that. I mean, I see a lot of really rich behavior, but that one was just so mind-blowing. Story 3. I photograph luxury homes and architecture for a living. There's a neighborhood I do a lot of work in called Silverleaf, and it's probably the most exclusive neighborhood in the valley. The bottom part of the neighborhood is your typical wealthy people's homes. Doctors, lawyers, business owners, etc. Extremely nice houses, but still attainable for anyone who wants to put in the effort to work those types of careers. As you drive towards the back of the neighborhood, you start heading up a mountain that's divided into two parts: Upper Canyon and the summit. There are probably 100 houses up there. The houses start close to 15 million, but several are over 20 to 30. One of the builders I work with is developing a house he's asking about 60 million for. Story 4. The head governor of my high school was a millionaire and would occasionally show up to have meetings with staff and/or parents on how things were going and where he could better invest in the school. One of these days he shows up and finds a kid crying by a vending machine because he dropped his £1 coin and it had rolled underneath. Governor opens his wallet, gives the kid a £10 note, and wanders off. The vending machines only accepted coins, so the very confused kid was a lot richer but still no closer to being less hungry. Story 5. My soon-to-be mother-in-law asked me and my fiancée, her son, if we knew that some people don't have reliable transportation to get to college, which causes them to miss class and/or show up late. Apparently, her most recent appointment as the chair of a teacher education program at a university has been very eye-opening for her. Story 6. This guy my father knew had a really nice house and was owner of a garment factory. My father did okay for himself. He has a big apartment in NYC with 4 bedrooms. This dude went to my dad's house. At first he asked where the rest of the house was, then he told him his closet was bigger than his house. He wasn't lying. We went to his house. His gym had like 40 different treadmills, rowing machines, and those body by Jake Band machines. Also, the walk-in closets were in fact bigger than my dad's bedrooms. His son had almost every game for every system. 15-year-old me was in awe. Every system in order, nearly stacked games across a giant wall and a huge projection TV in his wall. Last time I heard about him, he was at my dad's job. This guy was my dad's boss, asking for $98K to go on vacation. The accountants were pissed he asked for it on short notice. Story 7. I worked in a sporting goods store in my early 20s and got absolutely screamed at by an old man for not knowing who he was when I asked him for ID. Apparently he owned like half the town and others at the store would kiss his ass. At $9 an hour, I wasn't paid enough to kiss his ass even if I cared who he was. I wasn't from there and had only seen him come in a few times to buy random crap. But either way, the federal government requires you produce ID to purchase a firearm, and I was doing my job. It's been over 20 years and my husband, who has heard the story, will randomly look at me and burst out, "You seriously don't know who I am?" Story 8. Had one of the outside salesmen drop in and we were talking about clothes for some reason. He said he donates his clothes to charity every year, so he doesn't buy the very expensive shirts. His shirts are $300 each. Then he tells me he does buy decent shoes though. He showed me a company online where most of the shoes cost more than my car. How do we work for the same company and live that differently? Story 9. I watched a guy walk into a car dealership and buy a Suburban. He literally walks in, goes up to a sales guy, points to the one in the lobby, and goes, "I'll buy it. I don't want to haggle or any high-pressure nonsense. I'll pay for the sticker and I need to be done in 10 minutes. He was driving it out of there 10 minutes later. I asked the other sales guy, "Who is that?" He goes, "He owns a bunch of fast food places, Pizza Huts and KFCs and stuff, I think. He comes in every few months." "What does he do with the cars?" I asked. "Sometimes trades even in, sometimes signs them over to friends or family members. He gave our secretary his old Corvette. Said it was about to die anyway. Only had like 50K miles on it. She still has it, been 3 years." Story 10. Friends' wealthy parents were going to give me a set of furniture for free until I wound up moving cross-country, couldn't accept it. Before I was to take it, I asked for the manufacturer so I could take measurements for my house to make it all fit. They responded, "Oh, we're not sure, it's pretty old." Here I thought it was maybe from the 70s. Yes, it was from the 70s. The 1870s, from France, and it was all handmade Louis XV pieces. When I showed my home decor-obsessed mother, she appraised it all. Some were north of $5,000, just for a small hallway desk. We're both upset about it to this day. Story 11. I used to teach at a private school with some extremely wealthy families. I overheard a student's conversation with her dad on the phone one day. Jessica invited me to a sleepover at her house next weekend. Pause. Yes, I know the Super Bowl is next weekend, but I've been to the Super Bowl before. I have never been to a sleepover. Story 12. When being surprised that airlines will allow a larger-looking backpack in the overhead, he said, "Oh, it's been so long since I've flown commercially, I had no idea." He said it in such a shy manner, like he was embarrassed to say he flies privately. This is a 75-year-old that looks like he's a regular middle-class Joe and gives off no hint that he's extremely wealthy. Story 13. I am a professor at a private university. One October, I was talking with one of my students about a hurricane that was approaching Miami and how bad it could be for the people who lived there. The student, who was from Chicago, said in acknowledgement, "Yes, my family had to have our captain move our boat. I believe it was Hurricane Matthew and it turned northward before reaching Miami." Story 14. My buddy's sister is obscenely wealthy, bought a sprawling house on the CA coast, tore it down, and had a new one built. She had a huge multi-panel sliding glass electronic door installed, but upon moving in, decided it wasn't up to her specifications. She had the entire set of panels demolished and rebuilt. She complained that she couldn't move in as quickly as she had hoped. She also has no problem throwing down thousands of dollars on dinner, but bitches when her employees ask for better wages or need time off. Story 15. I used to work as a waiter for a Michelin star chef. He had his own side hustle providing catering for weddings and events. One of the events was a charity fundraising auction, total tax dodge. The items being auctioned were brand new farming equipment, heavy-duty vehicles, Persian rugs, sought-after art pieces, etc. Honestly, it was disgusting to witness, and I felt like I was peeking behind the curtain. The celebrations, to announce lunch and end the lunch, were a brass horn section, to announce lunch beginning, and then daylight fireworks. Also, peacocks walking around the grounds. Was Saltburn-level posh crap. All old money. Also, forgot a funny one where I had to call a client. They didn't pick up, but immediately called back. Ever so sorry, the phone in the East Wing seems to be on the fritz. What shows you that a person is rich at first glance? Story 1. I'm surprised I haven't seen anyone say skincare or just health in general. Wealthy people can afford to make themselves better looking. That's the only pattern I identified. I worked with many billionaires. Wealthy people are just people with more money but still have very different personalities. No clear giveaway. But every single one had better skin than non-wealthy peers in the same age bracket. Story 2. The actual answer here is you simply can't. I have met a few billionaires here in Hong Kong, and if I didn't know beforehand who I was meeting, I would just assume I saw some retired old dude at a park reading the newspaper judging by his looks. On the other hand, I know dudes where they are living from paycheck to paycheck and try to act rich by using all their income to buy branded everything E.G cars, clothes, watches. Story 3. I get these guys driving cars that aren't flashy, but I kind of get the impression that some of them let them pendulum swing too far in the other direction. It kind of becomes its own kind of subtle design language all its own. Warren Buffett is a classic example. Didn't he live in the same house for 50 years or something, and it's a ranch? Things like that? And SBF, that cringe lord. I'm the richest under 30-year-old in the world, and all of my clothes fit in a backpack, he proclaims, while doing a stupid TikTok dance. It's embarrassing. I think driving a 30-year-old car that's not a classic of some kind is its own kind of deliberate move, you know? Go buy a Mazda or something, guy. Come on. Story 4. I work in STEM and see a similar pattern in terms of knowledge. I meet people that are extremely smart in their field and they can be kind of arrogant. But occasionally I've met people that are world-class in their field and they are almost always more humble. Probably because they better understand how little they actually know. Story 5. Retired realtor from Texas. Never judge a book by its cover. Sometimes the flashiest people with the best cars are the poorest. One of my biggest sales was an old guy with a beat-up pickup truck. Bought a 4,000-acre ranch in Texas because he already had a 10,000-acre ranch in Montana. He was loaded. Paid cash too. That's my experience in my social circle. Several friends' families who I thought were wealthy growing up can't afford their property tax and have to borrow from their adult kids, my friends. I know my friends are also in debt. But from the outside, you would never know it seeing them living in McMansions in upper-middle neighborhoods, using luxury bags and nice cars. It wasn't until I started working that I learned to appreciate my parents for living way below their means and instilling frugal mindfulness in me. Story 6. Maybe this is just me, but going to fancy restaurants and bars and acting like it's nothing. I went to a super fancy restaurant this summer and paid for both of us. It was his birthday. We got appetizers, steaks, a dessert to share, and nice wine. The check came out to around $300 and I acted very nonchalant about it, but I was screaming on the inside, so could be misleading, LMAO. I can totally afford it every once in a while and it was a great experience, but still. Story 7. Rich people don't discuss money. I was a live-in executive housekeeper for a very rich family in Sydney, Australia. Husband and wife never discuss money, ever. Or expenses. When they go on overseas holidays, which occurs 4 times a year, wifey books everything. Never once asked husband how much she can spend. As a stay-at-home wife, she has jurisdiction over family affairs. Story 8. Grew up poor, then a millionaire. Dad is self-made rags to riches, then poor again. Met my husband who is old money. Husband is successful in his own career, but drives a 2013 Ford. His parents live in an old farmhouse. All that said, IMHO, the most telltale sign of true wealth is reaction to bad news or inconvenience. For example, someone spills wine all over your dress shirt. Faux rich flips out. But old money laughs and says, I never liked that shirt anyway. Story 9. When they ask for specific things, not how much that thing costs. Example, I work at a high-end steak and seafood place. I had a table today that was mom, dad, and 2 kids. Kid of about 10 and a teen. The 10-year-old really wanted a steak and a lobster tail. We have a kid's lobster tail and a kid's steak. Mom was like, pick the steak you want and we will add the lobster tail on. The kid really knew his steaks and decided on the 10 ounces Wagyu and the Australian lobster tail. That was $160 alone. He also drank 5 butterfly pea lemonades that were $10 each. Didn't give a crap about the color changing at a certain point and just wanted his cup filled. The teenager didn't care much and just ordered something new whenever he could be pulled from his phones. He did eat it all. They were absolutely rich, and it was my 3rd time in 16 years in hospitality seeing an actual black card. Easiest $315 I ever made. Very nice people to boot. Story 10. Not sure if this one is universal, but when I used to work at a restaurant, we had a regular customer named Annie, very pretty girl in her 20s. She was very nice, but always seemed to be in a rush. She would come in regularly and get food and sometimes pay in big bills. Thing is, we would give the change back to her and she would just say throw it in the tip jar. So she dropped the biggest tips. The way she dressed, you can tell that she had money, very fancy and not flashy like a person who buys Gucci and other luxury brands to show off. Like you could look at her and tell the clothes were high quality and expensive, but were not outwardly flashy. But actual rich people in general tend not to be flashy in how they dress. It shows in their car, house, crap that really matters. Story 11. I remember in uni years back there was a guy in my class who was around 45-50s. No one was his friend due to the age, so I spoke to him cause I felt sad. Months later turns out he's some rich Nigerian, and was he rich? Not a billionaire, but close. After the first semester, they moved him as there was a credible threat from Boko Haram. It was wild. Story 12. Easy. Just their personality and how they carry their self. In Winston, you can immediately tell a Wake Forest person. Everything they do is like, hi, I've been rich my whole life, and I'm being rich right now. Entitled, but kind of oblivious. Like they're a person, but they can't stop acting like that. It's like, Drunk Patty from the bus station is a real person. You know she's Drunk Patty. She tells it like it is. Rich Wake Forest kids insist upon themselves. Story 13. Confidence. I recently went to an event and I knew that one of the attendees was very rich and successful because my parents told me, but it wasn't obvious. When I met him, he made eye contact, didn't overtalk, didn't small talk, didn't fidget. Was pleasant, but not overly deferential. Wasn't showy. Didn't humble brag. Wasn't acting like a politician or trying to get people to like him. Just quiet confidence. If I hadn't already known he was so successful, I would have known it then. Kind of like the royal family and then never explain, never complain. Like this guy has never bumped into anyone accidentally and said, "OMG, I'm so sorry." He probably said, "Pardon me," and moved on. Story 14. I've read the book The Millionaire Next Door, and it changed my perspective on who is truly rich/wealthy. I also work as a stripper, so it's honestly a tough call. I've had men spend thousands on me in VIP that look normal. Typically, I would say a very expensive watch is a telltale sign. Patek, Hublot, Rolex, etc. Sometimes the very rich dress down because they have nothing to prove to anyone. I take in so many factors. So many people can lease a nice car, rent a nice house, and be living paycheck to paycheck. My friend had told me that old money friends were quiet, luxurious brands rather than Gucci, Dior, Louis Vuitton. Story 15. I went to a fancy prep school and grew up in a fancy part of the country. I'd say signifiers of real wealth are subtle, especially on the East Coast. Lamborghinis, McMansions, and Gucci are for the posers. A truly rich person wears an unusual piece of clothing from an obscure but prestigious European brand worn with an otherwise unremarkable outfit. They mention offhandedly that they vacation to their own properties in lesser well-known but old money locations. Ever heard of Fisher's Island, New York? They drive unflashy but interesting cars like a 1979 Wagoneer in immaculate shape. They mention where they went to high school, and you know what Groton is. What's the most out-of-touch thing you heard from rich people? Story 1. Back when I was in my early 20s, my beat-up old car broke down in my job's parking lot when I was about to drive home. I was getting paid $10 an hour as a pastry chef at a catering company. This was barely enough to cover my rent. I was obviously pretty distraught over my car dying. My boss, company owner, ended up saying to me, "Why are you so upset? It's just a car. Just buy another one." I couldn't even respond. I just looked at her like she was crazy. Story 2. I occasionally drive minibuses for a private school in the UK, have overheard some very privileged conversations from the students, but one that sticks out is, a tutor on the bus asked a student what he says when other students made comments about the very expensive watches he wears to school, to which he said his response is, "My dad has the same 24 hours as your dad." He then proceeded to go on about how his dad inherited a massive entertainment chain and various hugely successful companies from his grandfather. Story 3. It's just so easy to just drop $1,000 at Target, you know? My Starbucks coworker in Calabasas, Kardashian land, after he spent $983 on toys for his 4-year-old nephew's birthday. I don't know why he worked at Starbucks, except maybe his rich family finally forced him to get a job. I knew someone who grew up on an island full of rich twats. He refuses to visit it even though his wife really wanted to, who were all working part-time at coffee shops or the moral equivalent because it was the bare minimum to satisfy the terms of their trust funds. Story 4. Mine is a story my dad likes to tell about the first parent meeting at my college orientation. The school spent 20 minutes talking about tuition payment plans. Then the mom of a kid I'd met earlier in the day raised her hand and asked, in genuine confusion, as if everyone else in the room was stupid, "Why would anyone bother with all that when you could just write one check for the entire year?" Story 5. A coworker asked me what bank I used for my safe deposit box. I said I didn't have a safe deposit box. She said, "But where do you keep your jewels, then?" Edit, I said I didn't have any jewels, and she just said, "Huh," and changed the subject. I actually get the sentiment. If I owned anything expensive, I would probably also have a safe place for it. but something about it made her sound like a Disney villain even though she was a very nice person. It's a very vivid random memory, thanks OP. Story 6. Company events where people with investment properties told us that you just need to save hard to get that deposit. Just don't go out to dinner with your spouse as much, or just go to the pub every other Friday. Yeah, so reducing restaurant dinners from 0 to 0 and the pub tab from 0 to 0. Still broke. My colleague left the Zoom midway through. If it was in person, he would have broken the door on the way out, or came across the conference table at them. Story 7. While working for a valet parking service in the Santa Barbara area years ago, a woman hired us for a jewelry showing she was having at her giant house in Montecito, and while we were waiting for guests to arrive, my boss informed me that when the guests get in their cars to leave, that I needed to be sure to close their car doors or else they would just drive off with their doors open, as they're so used to people closing their car doors for them. Story 8. I needed a bicycle to get to a new job. Found someone online selling a really nice bike for cheap, so got in touch. Took 2 trains to their house to buy the bike, and when I got there it was a mansion. The bike was in a garage full of supercars and classics. They asked me where my truck was to load the bike on. When I told them I was riding the bike home, they laughed, and before I knew it, everyone in the house had been called to the garage to hear how I was riding the bike 3 hours home in the dark. No one offered me a lift. They just acted blessed at how they didn't have to do such things. Story 9. Even from not as rich people, I have still been asked why I don't take the car instead of public transport when I buy used stuff. Or once when I picked up a lamp for free, the woman asked me why I didn't just buy it as it wasn't expensive. Like, what did she expect me to answer? Start sharing my whole story of how I just moved to a place on my own and don't have parents who can help buy stuff for me? If someone spends time picking stuff up or buying used stuff without a car, it's probably not for fun. Story 10. I was a live-in super of a building in Boston. The building was 43 units, 40 were college kids. One year a young girl moved in next to me, and 3 months later her electricity was shut off. She started pounding on my door demanding that I turn her electricity back on. I checked her circuit breakers, they were fine. Went into her APT and immediately noticed the pile of electric company mail on her table with big red letters, last warning. Me, you didn't tell the electric company that you were the new tenant. Tenant, what's the difference? Why do they need to know it's me? Me, they need to send you a bill for electricity usage. Tenant, now I know you're messing with me. You don't pay for electricity. She moved out 2 days later out of embarrassment, her parents having to pay for breaking the lease. She couldn't look at me for those 2 days. Story 11. Rishi Sunak, British Prime Minister, for the moment, is stinking rich and grew up in a pretty affluent family, went to a leading private school, Winchester, and Oxford. During the interview rounds in the current election campaign, he was pressed by an interviewer about whether his family had ever had to give anything up. After much umming and ahhing, the only thing he could come up with was Sky TV, a British satellite TV service. He was lampooned for days about that one. He really is a colossal twat. Story 12. Used to travel for a glamping company, Glamour Camping, where we would set up huge canvas tents for fancy weddings and parties. We woke up real early one morning to a bunch of calls from some rich LA socialite about how the tents were wet, no other explanation. We rushed over, and it turns out she had no idea what the concept of condensation in the morning was. I can't control nature. Sorry lady, you're not getting your deposit back. Story 13. I work for a startup based out of San Francisco. I'm a remote employee halfway across the country and am therefore a sort of second-class citizen. My direct peers who work in SF make at least double what I do, and they almost all had extremely privileged upbringings. They went to top 10 business schools, they summer in Tahoe, that kind of thing. I was in the home office a few months ago for our annual kickoff meeting, and one of the speakers pulled the room. Has anyone here worked at Amazon? Nobody raised their hand. Wow, I'm surprised. I said, does the warehouse count? And the entire room erupted in laughter. For sure, I just told a very enjoyable joke. Story 14. Then I want to say 12 or 13. The 1-year-old son of one of my clients literally expressed confusion to me when I asked him where I could get more paper towels from when they ran out in the washroom of his parents' many $million-dollar yacht. He said something like, "It's always there. What do you mean?" He was so disconnected from the process of, I guess, cleaning and restocking that he just thought that stuff would always be there and never run out. LOL. The look of genuine confusion on his face was just something else. That's not the first time I experienced that either. Talking to the kids of extremely wealthy people is always a trip. Story 15. When we met in our friend group, the rich friend showed us his new expensive winter jacket for €500 plus, and from time to time he goes on a shopping haul with his rich dad where he spends 1-2K. One time we confronted him about his bragging and asked him if he didn't think that his spending for clothes is quite a lot. His answer, "Well, I know some people who spend more and I know some people who spend less, so I think I am average." Statistics 101. Women who left a rich guy. Why did you do it? Story 1. He used his wealth and spoiling me materialistically as a means to justify/compensate for his controlling and possessive behavior that suffocated me until I left. He would take me on surprise holidays, etc., but it doesn't matter in the end if he's not treating you right on a human level. He was emotionally unintelligent, entitled, and quite narcissistic. How they treat your emotions, their character, and how they respect you as a human being ultimately matters more than money. Story 2. Had a guy asked me where I wanted to go on a trip. I was like, maybe Greece. He was like, let's go to Rome. I had been there before several times, but told him that's fine. Where we go doesn't matter as long as we're together. So we went and saw a whole bunch of sights, which I had seen before but still loved it. But I apparently wasn't fawning over him enough and didn't seem grateful enough for him taking me there. He kept trying to tell me how much money he had spent on food to apparently try to make me grateful, LOL, which led to a whole huge fight, and then we broke up basically. Story 3. He kept bragging about daddy's money and that he will take over the company. It was embarrassing and I realized I could never fall in love with him. I broke it off 3 months after he asked me to go on a 1-month cruise with him and his family, fully paid for me. I decided that it just wouldn't be right for me to go on that cruise knowing I wanted to break it off. I'm still very proud of myself for making that choice at 22 as someone who grew up poor and never even been on holiday, never mind a different country. It was my dream to travel, but it worked out well because now I get to travel due to my own hard work. Story 4. He wanted me to leave college, leave the country, and marry him. He was obsessed with my virginity and fertility. He refused to kiss me to preserve our martial night of bliss. He often told me he loved me because I was trainable and he could guide and mold me. After 3 weeks of dating, he proposed. The diamond was massive. He showed me what would be my new home. He still owns the property and car with a driver. He had already purchased jewelry and chosen a few wedding dresses. It felt weird to me. I was 19, he was 40. He had never raised his voice or laid a hand on me, but it felt imminent. When I said no to his proposal, he immediately called me old and fat and said he would find a young, beautiful wife. I still shudder to think about that last sentence. I remember saying, insert name, I'm 19. What are you going to do? Go to a high school? He didn't respond. He's now even more wealthy and still alone. Story 5. Being called old and fat at 19 is wild. I have a feeling this guy isn't going to stop until he can find someone young enough to put up with his nonsense and abuse. It makes me think about how many states still allow child marriage with parental consent. Story 6. I'm not a woman who left a rich guy. I'm a man who left a rich woman. She was a dick. She was always mean. The smallest thing made her mad, and because she never really had to worry about things and repercussions, that let herself think it's okay to just go apecrap crazy and then provide gifts and do the thing to apologize. Intimacy was cool, but she was mean. Story 7. Went on dates with a daddy's money rich guy. Went originally kept the dates basic cheap places and I'd pay for myself. He hated the dates and wanted to treat me. I was hesitant of that, but allowed him on one date. His attitude 180-foot D, and he believed since he dropped money on a nice steakhouse and expensive wine that I owed him. He wanted intimacy. He wanted me to be more submissive. He lost his mind. I blocked him immediately. Story 8. Dated a hedge fund dude for over a year. We lived together and were ring shopping. He said once we get married, I wouldn't work anymore. And he forbid me from getting a graduate degree. I dumped him. He accused me of being a gold digger, weird and wrong. Months later, he proposed to an ex-GF who was actually a gold digger who was waiting in the wings for him. He basically wanted total control over finances so he could cheat and have final say over all the family decisions. No regrets leaving him even though he's worth millions and I've had to work harder for longer in my life. Waitevs bruh, can't buy my dignity. Story 9. Because to him I was an acquisition, not a partner. I was there only to check mark a box on his list, and once he had me he put very little effort into caring whether I was happy or not. The only times he'd get emotionally invested is if he thought I wasn't acting exactly the way he wanted me to. Example, I was feeling tired and ill and wanted to stay home from a long weekend away with his friends. That resulted in a long argument and gaslighting me until I relented and went, and then he was mad that I didn't act like I was having a good time. Because I wasn't, I was sick. Story 10. We were long distance and I was so infatuated with this guy. Going as far as uprooting my whole life to move to another country. I didn't tell him about my plans because I wanted to be able to stand on my own. While in the process of looking for an apartment/job in his city, the pandemic hit. A month passed and he wrote me a heartfelt letter breaking it off. I was so sad for like a month. Then by chance a girl is suggested on my Facebook. Turns out it's his new girl. I went back on old texts and just thinking of convos we had. So many ignored red flags. Now I'd go as far as being thankful for the clean cut the pandemic gave me. Story 11. Because no matter how much men like to push the narrative that a woman will always stay if you have money, it's not true in most cases. Everything was bad in the relationship. Intimacy was awful. The division of house labor was non-existent. He had horrible hygiene, used to mommy doing all his laundry even though he was 27, and always tried to use money to get out of problems. Men, if the only thing you bring to the table is money, you are not bringing anything. Story 12. Our values were incompatible. He believed that everybody is just out for themselves and used it as an excuse to do whatever he wanted regardless of the repercussions on his community. He mocked me for going out of my way to improve my community and work in a job that saves lives, even though it's stressful and doesn't pay that well. He was also incredibly insecure and tried to make me feel insecure by insulting my body and intelligence so that I wouldn't leave him. He hated women and believed that women are all out to take advantage of men, acting like I was a gold digger even though I repeatedly turned down extravagant gifts and trips from him. In short, it had nothing to do with the money. He just sucked. Story 13. I did it out of love, honestly. He wanted several biological children, I don't. So the most loving thing I could do was to let him go look for someone who wants to have all the kids he does. I am proud of myself for doing it even if it puts me in an economically worse position. Even socially, as I've lost a family who helped me so much. I will probably never be in a relationship that provides that kind of generational wealth. But at least I did the most loving thing. I hope the future will provide me with a safe partner who doesn't demand me being pregnant several times to be loved. Story 14. Because he thought he could fix all of our problems with money. He wasn't rich, but he had money. I felt so alone and neglected in our relationship. He'd rather spend time playing video games than spending time with me. He wouldn't listen to me when I spoke. He didn't take my feelings seriously and would laugh when I was upset. He wouldn't help me around the house, and his way of putting a band-aid on it was by taking me out or buying me gifts. I didn't want any of that. I just wanted to be treated like a person and have my feelings respected. No amount of money could make me stay with someone who thought my feelings were funny rather than legitimate. Story 15. He couldn't do anything. He didn't know how to pay a bill, how to cook, how to dress for anything non-casual, how to manage money's nothing. He had never had a job and he was nearing 30. He lived like a 13 years old, with his mother doing everything. He wasn't like a whiny little kid. He was a nice guy, but his mother was too comfortable having him rely on her, like he was her parent. He was going to eventually inherit a share of hundreds of millions, if not $1 billion. I could have a super wealthy life. I wasn't interested in that. I loved him. But I realized I'd be signing up for a life of being his carer/organizer/planner. Now I'm about to break up with a guy who became the same but is dirt poor LMAO. Lack of independence is such a massive turnoff. What is a rich person thing you would be totally into if you became rich? Story 1. My friend's ex-wife inherited several $1,000,000 when her father died, which was after they divorced and retired in her mid-40s. She was running her own, small, business at the time and sold the business, but she also owned the building the business was based in and leased it to the new owners of the business. So she now has that income on top of her millions of dollars. My friend doesn't know the exact amount she inherited, but says he'd be surprised if it wasn't at least 5 to 7 million. My friend said she remodeled her entire house after getting the inheritance as well and paid off the remaining mortgage. That sounds like a pretty sweet situation to be in. Story 2. I was dating a guy in college who came from a pretty privileged background. We were having lunch and, when he took a sip of his OJ, he immediately spit it back out into the bottle, pulled my bottle from my hand and said, "Don't drink it, it's gone bad." It hadn't gone bad. He had only ever had fresh squeezed OJ before, so Tropicana tasted like rot to him. I could definitely get used to that. Story 3. The giant kitchens with an island in the center and high-end appliances. It's not like I like cooking. I just love giant kitchens. Edit to add, I'm having so much fun conversing in the replies. You guys made my day. Let's all gather in my big fancy kitchen when I get it and have an all-out feast. Story 4. I used to install appliances in high-end homes like that. Had one lady exchange her $7,000 double wall oven 6 times because the barn door style top oven had doors that weren't perfectly level. I finally discovered the bottom shelf in the wall opening was slightly unlevel, throwing off the doors by a fraction. She wasn't satisfied with this development, so I just discounted the thing to be done with it. I told her you'll never notice if it's not pointed out and you have a good seal, it won't affect how anything cooks. This lady looked at me and said in a snooty voice, "Oh, I don't cook anything, this is just for the look." I have never straight up left a house without saying anything, but I did that day. Story 5. All bills are set to auto pay. I made a bill escrow checking account. It has been a game changer. I sat down and made a list of all my recurring bills and worked out how much I spent on each over a year, summed it all up, and then worked out how much per paycheck would get me that amount. I padded it out a tiny bit and seeded the account with a bit more so it can get started. I asked my boss to direct deposit that amount into the account and the rest into checking. Now all my recurring bills get paid out of this account on auto pay and I hardly ever think about it. Every year or two I redo the math and adjust what I pay into the account, but otherwise not much is needed. It is a huge stress relief. My checking account now shows me exactly what I have left to spend till the next paycheck. And I never have to worry about making rent. I'm surprised this is not more common. Story 6. Art. Collecting it, commissioning it, sponsoring shows. I love to see what people create: painting, sculpture, fabric, glass, metal, photography, mixed media, installation. When I see something I really love, it energizes me. I got this beautiful print when I was in Costa Rica for the first time and started learning about the artist, Charlie Harper. Ended up making a trip to Cincinnati to visit an exhibit at their art college, where he went to school. A retrospective of his work. Some people thought I was crazy to make a 4,000-mile round trip to go look at art, but it made me incredibly happy. Literally the happiest I had been since Costa Rica. Story 7. I have been lucky enough to go on a private jet about 5 to 6 times, like G6 level. It's obnoxiously expensive, but not underrated. To not have to deal with airport nonsense, security, etc. It's way more expensive than I ever thought, so I doubt I would actually ever pay if I had the means. I'm kind of cheap, but it's nice. Story 8. Intense self-care things that only rich people can afford and continue to maintain on a regular basis. I'm female. Do you know how amazing it would be to get regular facials, lashes, makeup, new clothes/shoes, nails, and hair done, the best vitamins, Botox, spa days, and maintain it? Bro, That's why you can tell a rich person when you see one, they're always sparkling, if they're smart about it. There can be some horrid looking rich people because they got into drugs/bad things. Basically, my whole aesthetic could be impeccable if I had the money for it. I always envied that about the wealthy. Maybe one day. Story 9. Are we talking about new money or old money? Personally, I'd live like old money rich. Not showy nonsense, but high quality goods that last forever. And maid/cleaner to keep my house clean. I like to cook, and so between my cooking and maybe a few more meals out, I don't need a cook. Maybe a gardening service, but I don't plan to have a vast estate with acres of grounds to keep up. Maybe a place by a beach for getaways. Personally, I'd like a place in Bonaire for all the great shore diving and the relatively short plane ride for me. Story 10. Vacation. God, I'd love to just drop everything and travel while I'm young, even for just 2 weeks, not even anything fancy, just be comfortable enough to go see other countries, maybe shop there a bit, eat good food. It's kinda crazy that for me that's a pipe dream that may not be achievable for me while I'm young and could enjoy it. Even in retirement, there's no guarantee. Story 11. Secretly paying for random things all the time. Out at a restaurant? I'm leaving a tip bigger than my bill. And paying for the family next to me. In line at Starbucks? Here's a $500 gift card, use it for everybody who comes by today. Waiting at the pharmacy? Somebody is gonna get free Xarelto and free insulin for as long as they need it, cause I'm gonna sign up to pay their copay/bills. At the grocery store? I'm gonna pay for your stuff and your stuff and your stuff and your stuff. You need hundreds of dollars for your baby's formula and your WIC card isn't covering it? I got you. We're gonna stock you up. It would be so fun just to take a financial burden off of somebody and just let it be a secret blessing. No big show of things, no filming it for social media points, no huge look at me being so nice vibes, just being nice because I can and because I have the ability to share my blessing-filled life. Story 12. Housekeeping. Personal chef. Regular spa days/facials/massages/money/petty. Many vacations all over the world/owning vacation homes. Watching concerts/artists either in private concerts or from the best seats in the house. Have a dog or 4. But first and foremost, I would spend all the money needed to get the best healthcare possible with all the extras imaginable to heal my body/find a working treatment for my illness. Story 13. International travel. We have a family friend who is very wealthy and she goes to a different country at least once every other month. I've never left the US and I've always wanted to see the world. Granted, you don't necessarily have to be rich to travel internationally, but I'd like to be able to go without having to worry about debt when I return or missing time off from my job, where I'm only allowed a little bit of PTO. Story 14. Rich person partying, as a guest only, just for the experience. Otherwise, I can't stand the wasteful lavishness most of them think is normal. If I am ever going to spend fortunes on anything, it would be opening a business and growing it, and having an atomic bunker shelter built under my dingy hovel on the outskirts of some city of little consequence in the mountains. Or something. Realistically, though, I would buy up some businesses that practically run themselves already, making me more money with only minor input from my part, and higher stakes investing than just gov bonds. Story 15. I would for sure do the whole travel to exotic locations thing for a season in my life. Just really luxuriate in the freedom money can offer. Thing is, I also know that would be temporary. I have real things I'd love to do with profound wealth, open animal shelters, and help people with medical bills. You can't administrate that business acting like a rich lunatic, jetting around the globe all the time. It would eventually come to an end, and I'd set myself to more fulfilling tasks like that. The greatest joy in life is enhancing the joy of others. Alright folks, that's a wrap. If you like this, please hit the thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. You can also share your thoughts in the comment below.